Financial Argument. Follow us on YouTube.
Hey Dave, thanks for being here. And we were discussing that you were over in Europe and you saw many different things out in Europe with refugees, with the economy. And I just wanted to ask you briefly about the refugees. You sent me some pictures about the banners that are on some of the buildings saying welcome refugees. What was your experience with the refugees in Europe?
Now, I didn't see what we've seen a lot of in the news, and perhaps, being in different areas, you would see different things, obviously. I personally saw an integration of the refugees into the society, but I'm not really sure that just being there for a short period of time would have given me enough to really dig deep enough. But I did see several banners up on government buildings saying refugees welcome, and they can basically come in there and not have to worry about anything. If you look at how close you would see a country like, for example, Morocco and Spain are, it doesn't take much to get over across the water there. So there's obviously a big channel that has opened up, and the reasons why they're fleeing, that's a whole different topic. But what I saw was definitely that, you'd see a lot of females in the headscarves, and you would see with their strollers and with their cell phones and everything like this. So clearly they are integrated into this society. I did not see any of the, let's say, the violence or anything like this. So that's what I would say.
Since you were there, what was your impression of how the economy was doing in Spain? Did it look like everything was great and people were, the shops were all open, or did you see a different picture when you were over there?
Oh, it was absolutely going downhill. It seemed to be that the economy, the unemployment rate, I've always read the statistics, but actually going there and actually seeing it for myself was quite amazing. You would see a lot of the degeneration of society that has occurred. And, you definitely saw a lot of prostitution on the streets, on the main streets during daylight hours. You saw a lot of drugs being sold in public. You see graffiti everywhere. You see, just off the main street, you see tons of stores that were closed, and, all these shops and businesses basically not reopening. I saw buildings, skyscrapers that had, they were going up, but perhaps the construction was abandoned at some point, and graffiti all along the buildings, like as if they've taken over. And you just see things just don't look the way they should be. The youth are day or night. There's large swaths of people just out on the streets, locals. And it just seems like the general unemployment numbers that you see in the news, I would say they're fairly accurate in Spain, at least.
From what you saw there and from what, we see here in the United States, with the unemployment rate, with banks being in trouble throughout Europe, huge amount of people being unemployed. What we're seeing here is actually what's really happening over there.
That's correct. We're seeing basically a difference in between statistics and then what you see on the streets. And a lot of times, because of the media, because of the mainstream media, they act as a filter in between you and that information. But when you go and see it for yourself, you can really understand what the truth is.
So coming back here to Canada and the United States, we're being fed that the economy is fantastic here. We know that the president of the United States was out there telling us that the economy is doing well. The United States came out with their unemployment numbers of 4.7%. What's your general view of the economy here in the United States and in Canada? Like, what are you seeing here from your research? Do you feel the economy is doing well, or do you feel the economy is not doing what the U.S. government central bankers are saying it's doing?
as long as the welfare programs are there to support people, then you don't really get that sort of reaction from people, the outrage, the chaos and the riots and everything like this. And Canada has an excellent welfare system. They're definitely supporting a lot of people, and it's no different than the US. Look at the food stamp program. Look at all of these other indicators that show you that social assistance programs are always becoming more of a burden on the government. There's no doubt about that. And there was only, these brief moments in time when they make cutbacks on the programs, and that's how they show their numbers, they skew them. But that doesn't happen often, and we just see a general trend of more people on disability, more people on unemployment, more people are on all of these different programs, and whether or not they're abusing the system, that's a different story. But we see the same thing occurring. You take a city like Detroit, and that's obviously a very good example of this. And you find that the middle class evaporated a long time ago. Then you use that as sort of a crystal ball and apply that to a different city, maybe the city you live in, and you have to figure, once the middle class disappears, that's it, the economy is gone. The middle class needs to be there, you need a strong middle class to have a strong economy, and of course that doesn't really exist anymore, and you can see it fading away in many cities around the US, around Canada as well.
Let me ask you about the housing in Canada, because we're getting reports here in the United States that, the housing prices are skyrocketing in Canada in different areas. And now we're seeing the housing prices they're starting to fall. Are you seeing that where you are?
It depends on the city you look at, and also depends on the type of real estate as well. What I would say is that there are, and it goes with any city really, but there are particular areas which are, if you look at last year's prices to this year's prices, a minimum, and I'm talking about a single family dwelling, detached home in a great area, you're looking at $1 million minimum. And we're talking about a 100-year-old home. These are perhaps renovated and everything, but you're looking at $1 million. Last year to this year, a minimum of 20% higher. That same home has gone up about 15 to 20% higher. Every home will sell above the asking price in the Greater Toronto area for the most part. I'm talking about single family detached homes. That's what's happening right now. Now there's an abundance of condominiums that are going up, and these generally have sort of flatlined in price. But that's what I'm seeing here. I pay particular attention to this, and I'm very aware of the pricing that happens. Generally, you'll pay at least for single family Toronto area, you will be paying a minimum of 20% over the asking price. That's what I'm seeing right now. It's astronomical where things have gone. But you go out into other areas, like I said, for example, the condominiums and things, those have flatlined. Those are there's just such an abundance of them, particularly all concentrated in one area. So as a home buyer, you have a lot of choice. So that's what's happening. In Vancouver, things are quite similar, but even to a greater degree. And it's really right now what people are seeing is, why would I rent when rent prices are so high? I might as well take the practically free mortgage and go ahead and buy a home. Yes, the mortgage rates are incredible. The mortgage amount is incredible. I have $1 million mortgage over here, but hey, as long as the bank is going to give it to me, I'm going to take it. And that's what a lot of people are doing right now.
So is this housing, this increase of prices, is this being driven by the people of Canada, or is this more speculators, foreign investors that's driving up the prices?
I would say it's definitely both. I mean, if you look at a city like, or I should just say, compare Vancouver to Toronto, you definitely see Vancouver prices being pushed up more so by the foreign investors. But overall, you do see definitely both. It's definitely people trying to be realistic realistic about their money at this time, and they don't feel that renting at this time, because rents are very expensive in Toronto. At least that's what I've found, compared to what you would get on your mortgage. It's actually, the ratios are off at this time. But what we will have to realize is that, yes, in fact, a lot of foreign buyers, particularly from China, and we're not talking about, Chinese citizens, or I should say, Canadian citizens of Chinese descent. I'm talking about China purchase, leaving them completely empty. I mean, they're dumping their money. Why? Because the restrictions were lifted for how much money they can bring up. There's a lot of loopholes now, so the money is just fleeing, and it's going particularly into the west coast of either the U.S. or Canada.
Now, is there any talk of bubbles, or from your research and from what you've been looking at, do you see bubbles forming in the housing market in Canada?
The bubble is, I would have to think, one of the biggest bubbles in history in terms of what I've seen, and that goes for the real estate, particularly Vancouver, Toronto. And it's so unrealistic at this point. The ratios it's off the charts. All of the ratios that I've looked at, I've tried to calculate it out. Is this even possible? Is this affordable? Because once it becomes unaffordable, then the bubble should pop. But the bubble hasn't popped yet. And that's what's so amazing to me. I mean, the drop downward is going to be so drastic. And the only solution is to basically take the mortgages and make them free. That's basically what they're going to have to do. And I believe it was Denmark who actually was going to go ahead with this. I'm not sure if they actually implemented it. But regardless, all I've seen is a bubble just growing bigger and bigger and bigger. But if in all of the mainstream media, in fact, in all of the people that you talk to locally, there is no bubble. But that shouldn't surprise any of us.
No, that really shouldn't, because people never really realize that there's a bubble until it's too late. And, they realize it when everything's coming down. Let me switch gears here and talk about the Federal Reserve and them raising interest rates. Starting from last year to this year, they said they're going to raise interest rates like 4 times or so. They've done once last year, but this year they haven't done any. They said they're going to do something maybe in July. If the Federal Reserve does raise interest rates, what do you see happening?
If they raise interest rates, they'll most likely do so at the same amount they did last time. So it went from 0 to 0.25, and that was the range it was at. Remember, it wasn't 0% interest rates technically. I mean, it was 0 to 0.25. Then it goes from 0.25 to 0.5. So really, there wasn't much of a jump in there because it's a range. And, if they bring it up, it's going to be such a minuscule amount yet again. So they do so in order to test the markets. And there's no telling when they will decide to bring those rates down. This is all about saving face. This isn't about a strong economy, because even Janet Yellen, even many members of the Federal Reserve have said specifically the economy is not strong enough to increase rates. We've heard that. Basically, everyone down the line has said that. We will think about increasing them later, but at this time, economy is not strong enough. But they may do so, like back in December, for example. There was no reason for them to increase other than the fact that it's all about saving face. Don't worry, world economy. We got you covered. We're going to do this program. We'll do it slowly. We promise. But ultimately, it's a failure.
Do you think the Fed will actually maybe somehow go negative in interest rates like Europe and Japan?
I think it could head in that direction. That's the only way that the economy could be supported any further without the introduction of another round of QE. That's the way I see it. I mean, it all depends on what they decide to do. Are they going to implement QE4? If so, perhaps they don't need to touch the interest rates. They can leave them where they are. So that's really all dependent on which actions they take. If they leave it the way they do, the stock market will trade within a range, the range we've been seeing now for quite some time, ever since QE3 stopped. The market has been trading within a range. So if they want to break beyond that range, they are going to have to do one of two things: take interest rates into the negative or implement some sort of quantitative easing program. That's the only way it's going to move. And it doesn't seem like they're really taking any action on either of those at this time. They're just waiting. And I think they're waiting, the Federal Reserve is waiting for other countries to sort of make their own moves. But ultimately, how long can you have this stagnating economy? And it doesn't really look good the longer you keep this going. So I think eventually they'll have to pull the trigger. I just wanted to mention before I forget, in the event they actually do increase interest rates to a considerable amount, let's say they brought them to 5%, just as an example, they'll crash the economy. That's obvious. But there is in that crash an opportunity for those in control to seize additional power. And I do believe at some point they may choose to do this. An excellent opportunity to crush the whole global economy, seize the assets, take from the people, take their liberties, take their freedoms, and then, of course, let it all go back up, and they will once again be more rich as a result, have more control, more power, and everything else.
Let me just understand what you're saying here. You're saying that if they raise the interest rates, a certain amount, they'll crash the economy, and they would do this on purpose. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
And they would do this where, I guess, the U.S. would crash, Canada would crash, and I guess it would affect the rest of the countries throughout Europe. They would bring everything to a screeching halt. What would they do next then? Because wouldn't everyone look at them and say, well, wait a minute, you just raised the interest rates and you crashed the economy. What did you just do?
It's no different than what we had seen in 1980 when they increased the interest rates. They did so, and eventually there was a restoration of everything. I mean, it takes time, but this, of course, this time is certainly different. What I would say is that if you bring the countries, the cities themselves into enough panic, the people will be subservient. If the people, 50 million of them nearly, are on food stamps, without that government support, without their obedience, they will not eat and they will begin to riot. The food riots will come, the store shelves will empty, and there will be chaos. And that order can be maintained if everyone follows in line and behaves well. But there could be a mess. So there is the opportunity for those in control to enact a police state, to have any different, there's so many different options. They could introduce what I've always claimed that will happen, not a one world currency, but a new monetary system, which could be like an IMF SDR, for example, which would back the currencies around the world. There's so many opportunities for them to basically take it to the next level. We see as recessions come and events happen all throughout the world, all at different times, all these different events. And they're stepping stones. They're little baby steps towards their ultimate goal of tyranny. But if you have a big event, a major world war, or some sort of crisis, that allows them to make a giant leap forward. And the people will not only be subservient, they will beg for it.
When do you foresee this happening? Do you think they would do something like this year?
I think this year is maybe a little bit too early. The public is still a little bit, despite all the unemployment, despite everything, the situation isn't critical at this time. However, I do foresee a little activity. Something's got to happen before the elections. And I just see that to sort of pull one side to another, perhaps some sort of false flag or anything else. I'm not saying it's going to be anything major, but there needs to be some turbulence before the elections to sway the decisions of the public. People need fear in order to move them, for lack of a better term, left or right.
how would this sway the people? Like, what are you trying to say here? So if there was some type of an event before the elections, would this make people go to like Hillary Clinton, or would it make it go towards Trump, or something completely different?
It all depends on how they are swayed, essentially. Whoever makes the claim that they can be the one to be the savior, like Obama was. He was the one that was going to save them, to rescue them, to unite everyone. And that was enough to win the people over, at least if we're believing that the elections are real. Mm-hmm. But essentially, you can see that in the people, that they will go behind the leader despite how bad it is. I mean, you see some of the so-called approvals from the people historically, where many countries have allowed, or the people have allowed their country to go to war with other countries for reasons we know that were totally false. And this has gone on in recent history. But as long as the people are willing to accept it, then it happens.
You mentioned war. Do you see war happening at this point?
I do see an expansion of the proxy wars that are taking place. Absolutely. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And the new enemy is ISIS. That's who's being used. I mean, it used to be called Al-Qaeda. Right. It's Daesh. It's got all these different names.
All Seems like they can't decide on one name.
That's right. And that's done on, of course, that's done on purpose to confuse everybody. Because they're like, look, I don't know who these people are. Look, just bomb them all and just get it over with. All right. You can do whatever you need to, whoever you need. Like you saw Leon Panetta say, we will come to you and tell you that we are going to attack a country. We're going to use the military of the United States, and we'll perhaps tell you about it. And that's it. We don't need to seek approval, don't need anything. And then you had, if I'm not mistaken, Senator Sessions up there saying, excuse me, what did you just say? And he repeated the exact same thing, bold face, just like that. And nothing happened. Nothing happened. Because that's just the way it goes.
Do you see Russia or China getting involved in war with the United States and Canada and the private Western Central Bank type of countries?
I've seen a lot of rhetoric. I've seen a lot of saber rattling. I mean, we see all these jets being scrambled and everything like this that's been happening. And there's always the disputes over territory, of course. And any of these events could spark a war. That's a given. However, what I do see is a lot of times that there's more going on than what we see in the news. I mean, there's a lot of politics that we're seeing, but there's a lot deeper here. And to some degree, at least with Syria, I've seen Russia on some fronts, actually given back a little bit, and they've also pushed ahead a little bit. So I'm seeing a little bending in that category. We see financially, I mean, the three countries they're still doing business together. I mean, it's not like the ties have been severed at all. We do see political alliances being formed elsewhere, though. That's for sure. And I do believe that the long-term goal is to do away, Russia and China, to form their own faction, do away with the West, do away with the United States. And that's the goal. When it all happens, I mean, it might be a little while.
Last time we spoke, we talked about bail-ins. Do you still see bail-ins coming to the U.S., Canada, and Europe?
Yes. The bail-ins will happen. They will steal money from people's accounts, and they will do so using excellent trickery. It depends on the country, depends on perhaps the bank or many different factors. But I believe that one of their options is to replace your bank account, or perhaps it's your mutual fund or anything like this, with a future dated government bond. This is the best way because it's completely useless. It's a garbage piece of paper, IOU, but the public will say, look, I can't have my money today, but I can have it 10 years from now, and I'll survive. I'll find a way. I'll make do. And this is going to be their opportunity to excavate so much wealth from the people. And there will be no riots. There will be no panic for the most part, because people will think, well, you know, I can make do. I'll deal with it. And it's not necessarily just theft or a police state in your face. They're doing so, taking the wealth from the people, and they will implement this all around the world. The G20 nations all signed on to it in Brisbane, Australia, if I'm not mistaken. That was 2014, the end of 2014. And this will happen. It's going to happen. They put it into law. Everything that we've seen historically, they put it into law, and then later on, at some point, they use it. It's just a matter of fact. They plan things way far in advance. Cyprus was just a pilot, just a test.
Dave, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
If you want, you can check out The Money GPS at YouTube. Just type in The Money GPS. Or you can check out my website, themoneygps.com, where I've got a free e-course on there. I've got free ebooks on there. I've got all kinds of stuff. So you can just, I should say that many of the people watching this are probably also subscribed to my channel as well. So hello to all of you out there. And that's it. The Money GPS. Thanks.
All right.